Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we'll be listening to Building a Spanish Language section that serves your whole community, a session that was presented at Winter Institute 2026 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Hi everyone. Please take a seat whenever you can. Cuando puedan, siéntense por favor. Welcome to our session, Building a Spanish Language section that serves your whole community, or I just call it Selling Books in Spanish. We need to do a few housekeeping things. And housekeeping. The slides and handouts. We want you to tell us in a survey how we did afterwards. The recordings are on BookWeb and BookEd. Silence your cell phones. And questions, we will have a super nice Q&A session. And the most important thing is to wait for the microphone and, speak your mind. I would love, and I want to thank Ingram Book Company as the major sponsor of our Winter Institute, as well as all the other entities involved. I'd like to definitely thank Harper, definitely thank IPS, and a bunch of other publishers that have gone out of their way to publish books in Spanish, which is so important. I do want to, besides thanking Ingram, IPS, Harper, the ABA staff, I want to thank the panelists for being here and for sharing, and you, the audience, for taking the stride and going out and really being interested in selling books in Spanish and serving your community, which after all is your community. Okay, we do want to talk about antitrust, correct? Okay, so regardless of what we all think or what we all want to speak our mind, booksellers, we are encouraged to, and panelists are encouraged to share the ideas, but the Sherman Antitrust Act prohibits us from discussing price or pricing policies, boycotts, dividing the market. Coño, that's a lot of stuff we can't talk about, but but we can, just gauge it and think about it, and we just can't talk about it here. Does that make sense? Okay, the objective of this agenda, by the end of this session, you will be, if you don't have a Spanish section, you will be able to have a Spanish section according to your needs, according to your store, and according to your money. If you already have a section, this session might help you to improve your section, to bring in other titles or not to bring other titles, or to look at certain criteria. And after all, we want to ease the process of carrying books in Spanish in your job and in your store. And to our we hope that this will ignite your passion for selling books in Spanish while serving your community. And I really want to thank the panelists for this. Before I go into, I believe it's introductions? Yes. Before we go ahead and have our panelists define themselves and introduce themselves. So I just wanted to say, hola, my name is Raquel Roque. I've been a bookseller all my life. I'm a mom, an abuela, and an activist at heart. I have lived in Miami for the past 60 years. I was born in Cuba, and over 60 years in Miami. It's a city where countless cultures successfully coexist, where we speak Spanglish, and where we read both languages, and when we think we're bilingual or biliterate. And, that's just the messy way that it is. And it's a passion. It's really become a passion. So, Thank you. More?
I'm Christina Rodriguez. I'm with Ingram Publishing Services. I am a sales rep that my territory covers most of the Southeast, including Texas and Oklahoma. But many of you in the room I know from my time as a bookseller, from working at Deep Vellum, one of the largest independent publishers who does translations in English. I also used to work at a public space, championing debut authors and other indies in literary magazines. And I've now been at Ingram, and I get to serve nothing but independent bookstores. So it's always nice to see all of my friends in the room. So.
Hi, I'm Veronica. I'm one of the founders and the general coordinator of Word Up Community Bookshop, Libreria Comunitaria. We're located in Upper Manhattan, NYC, in the neighborhood of Washington Heights, where 3/4 of everyone is Latinx or Hispanic heritage. We're turning 15 years old this summer. And for all of those 15 years, we've operated as a collective with around 60 active collective members at any given time. Most of the collective is volunteer, though now we also have a small full-time staff of 3.
I'm Ronnie Kudos from HarperCollins. I am filling in, unfortunately, for our editorial director of HarperCollins, Espanol, who is currently stuck in the snow apocalypse that is New York. So I will do my best, but HarperCollins has HarperCollins Espanol on our adult side. We also have titles in Spanish as well as bilingual titles on our children's list. So whatever ways we can help, we are here.
It's me. The next thing
I did want to ask first, who is in the room? Like, who already has a Spanish language section at your bookstore? Okay. And then how many people here don't yet, but want to add one or develop one? Okay, so most people here already have a section. And then the next question was, how many people here do events or programming in Spanish? Okay, and then how many people would want to start developing that too? Just out of curiosity. Okay, cool.
How about that? She already? You guys have already done this. Next?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Why this matters? Why does your Spanish section matters? I would like to say that by considering your community, you consider what unites the community. And it is very clear, at least to me, as an old bookseller, to know that the language, Spanish, is the one thing that unites our entire community, Latino, Hispanic, all over the United States. What languages are spoken and what cultures are represented. Bring books into your store that reflect your community and meet your community's needs. Spanish speakers, I know, are not a monolith. We're not just one people. There's many diasporas throughout the United States. The U.S. Census Bureau can give you all kinds of zip codes, cities, countries, everything. Once you have checked your data and know your demographics, also know that the one thing that is clear as day, it is all about the language that this community shares. They all read, they can read, or want to read books in Spanish. And that is one of the reasons why books in Spanish matter so much. Also clear is the fact that as a bookseller, you're creating and nurturing future bilingual and biliterate readers. And that is a really good thing for our society.
Yeah. Speaking to why it matters, in the neighborhood where Word Up is, you can walk all day going in and out of local businesses, in and out of schools, and hear Spanish everywhere. You can walk around and not hear any English. So it was imperative to have a Spanish language books at the shop. And it doesn't feel at all like going out of the way to do this, or at least to try to do this, because we'd be missing just a huge part, like most of the community otherwise. So that's why it's been in our name since we made a name. But beyond that, beyond just having the books, just because you have the books in your store, does that mean it's reaching people who want those books? Not necessarily. So, having the programming and the outreach and just having then booksellers who then are able to communicate in Spanish and be able to know the stock and has also been something that we've had to just consider in a lot of different ways over the years. And in general, we've been guided by the concept of language justice, the right everyone has to communicate in the language they feel most comfortable in. And I hate to admit that, like, when it comes down to it, we're still an English dominant space, but we do our best to try. And it's really hard in the context of this very like text heavy English dominant industry. But, we think about language justice as a process that we work toward. And, beyond the moral imperative, there's just being inclusive is a way to be selling more books and getting more people involved in the shop.
Okay, now we're going on to selecting and sourcing. And how to begin, how not to begin. From what I saw, a lot of you have a Spanish section. I don't know how, and I'm going to go into the numbers. I don't know how profitable your Spanish section is. I know it's wonderful, great goodwill, but at the end of ends, you got to make that section turn over in usual industry standards, or at least a little bit behind it. You do not have to determine what kind of Spanish language books your store needs. And frankly, that's a little bit presumptuous if we all do that. You have a blueprint. The titles and the books and the genres that you sell in your store in English are basically the same kind of genres and titles that you will be selling in Spanish. Your books in Spanish are a reflection of your bookstore, and it is serving the same community within your store. As a bookseller, contrary to predetermined mind, you do not need to determine what kind of Spanish language books you need, but you do need to determine how much space you will devote to the birth or to the growth of the section. You also have to know your titles or quantities, and you also need to look at the cash flow and budget allocation that you have for these. In the end, I have devised, and I can send out to you, books in Spanish section levels. For example, if you have a store where you want to allocate $500 and you can have 2 shelves, you can fill 2 shelves with 25 titles and 50 books, that hopefully will turn over within the 60 to 90 days industry standard. The same thing would go for a level 2, where you would have, for medium stores, where you would have 3 shelves with 50 titles. The same thing for level 3, where you have 100 titles and 150 books or 170 books. And at the end, you could have a huge, what I call 20 shelves, which is something like what we have in Books and Books. It's 36, it's 500 titles and about 650 books. I kind of have put an allocation and a budget for that. For something like that, that would be like a $7,000 allocation. And that's after your discount, after the free shipping, after everything that goes. And, that's almost the way I like to look at it from a business point of view. There's a lot of stuff that we can, think about determining and selecting and sourcing. One of the things is, well, where do you look for this stuff? And of course, you first go to your publishers and look at their catalogs. You also do Ingram, IPS that has it. Edelweiss has them covered. Hidong Books has a website. IPG has books and websites. PRH has basically a lot of stuff. Planeta USA through Two Rivers?
Yes, correct.
Two Rivers.
Yes.
Two Rivers has all the information and has wonderful titles. And Harper, of course, Hachette, Simon & Schuster. Most publishers have some kind of, Check out the lists in bookshop.org, review social media for what's buzzing, ask your customers, ask other bookstores, start with classics if you want to go with the no-brainers. And don't stress too much. If it's original Spanish lit or translation, you're the only one sweating it.
You got through it all. The next part, too, is asking your reps for guidance. I feel like I always try to explain the relationship with reps as that it is a team project. We are working together. We can very easily let each other down, but we can also really help each other to be successful in your store. And with IPS, like as Raquel mentioned, Planeta is one of our leading Spanish publishers, but many of you don't know that we do have a variety of Spanish and bilingual titles across different publishers, but across different genres, whether it's national bestsellers now translated into Spanish, children's books, even educational textbooks for learning new languages. And publishers such as Quinta de Luz, Greystone, they have an imprint that does bilingual kids books, or even Charco, or those different small independents. So with so many titles and so many opportunities to find different curated lists, this is where the data freaks are going to love this, because you are able to ask reps for sales reports of what maybe our best-selling Spanish books are, and we can make that into a collection for you. I've had buyers ask me for very niche topics where we're looking for picture books within a certain age grade. And I love that part of the job of being able to find those books for you. It almost feels like a little search. And I know some of you are like, Christina, I don't have a rep. No problem. I gave you guys a little handout that shows how to take advantage of all of the different opportunities that our iPage search functions have. We have a really amazing power search feature that can let you search by BISAC, by age group, if you are looking for Spanish or just bilingual books in general. And from there, you can create your own list. So even if you maybe don't have a rep that calls on you every season, there are a lot of tech opportunities within iPage to find those resources. And you can always ask, like, I would love to talk to you guys afterwards, but there's so many different things on our homepage. We update iPage with trending created list all the time. So you can always be checking that. There are features to make your own list. And usually what I see from a lot of buyers who really want to get into the Spanish game is like, once they start to take notice of some of these smaller independent presses that we support, they make a note of that. And in iPage, if you look for our Ingram Publishing Services tab, you can actually see the list of everyone that is distributed by us. So Consortium, Ingram Publishing Services. And then you can go and filter by that publisher. So you're just seeing those titles. And that's a fun little, when I was a buyer, I used to check those lists constantly. One, to see who was updated and who was added in as a new publisher, but also to see what their front list was doing. And I knew that I could trust them as a Spanish publisher because of the quality of their work. So I was constantly keeping tabs on those iPage search features. So I hope the handout helps, but we can also talk more about that after too.
And I think just to build off of that, I don't think we can stress enough, use your reps. Like if you have space for, let's say, 5 of our top selling titles, any of our reps can pull that list for you. If it's 5 adult titles, if it's 5 adult, 5 kids, if it's 5 adult, 5 kids bilingual, like just let us know what you're looking for and we can pare down that list. I think, at Harper, we've been building our Harper Espanol list, and Edward, who was supposed to be here, has been working really, really hard to make sure that we're sort of building our list to match the needs that your community has. So anything that you have, we sent a very small selection of books here just to kind of show a little bit of the breadth on the adult side of the Harper Espanol titles that we do. But, to an earlier point that was made, if there's a particular category that's working really well in your store in English and you need Spanish titles that will also work in that section, just let us know. Let us know how much space you want to dedicate to it. We can send a list. You can go through it and figure out which ones you feel strongest about and bring those in. So we're just always here to help. And one thing that it makes sense when you say it, but when I talk to people, sometimes they forget it, is just because we publish an author in English doesn't always mean we publish them in Spanish and vice versa. Like Harper Espanol publishes Frederick Bachman in Spanish, but HarperCollins does not publish Frederick in English. So I know it can add a level of complexity. So that's why if you can ask us, like, what are the top selling titles that we have? We might have some of your top selling English titles in Spanish that aren't from us. So we're always here to be a resource and get anything that you need to help with your Spanish section.
Okay. So I know that there's like half publishers on this panel, and that the advice so far has been to start with asking publishers, but we did the total opposite. We asked our customers, like, what do you want? What do you want? What books do you want to read? We had a sheet on our counter when we first opened, and this is how we found out about all the titles that just don't exist in this country, that are not published domestically, that title in the US or that author in the US, and then from there have tried to figure out how to get them. And so that's been a lot of unpacking that I can go into. I won't go into all of that detail, but I think the main thing is that it's the community that you're in that is going to be able to really guide because there is a difference between the Spanish translations. It's like we have a lot of customers that actually really react to, if it's a title that is like a Dominican author, but it's really Spain Spanish, that like say, I can't read this. Like it doesn't make, like the vocabulary is totally different. The rhythm is totally different. It doesn't make any sense anymore in Spanish or, and I think that that's something that we've really had to be keener to because, you can have books in Spanish that might not move because there might be, depending on how the translation went, it might be like almost something like offensive in the title. And I don't want to scare anybody too, but I feel like I'm maybe doing that by going too far into that. But there's just a lot of asking and a lot of like collaborating almost with all our neighbors and everyone in the collective as to what we should be stocking. And so some of the advice that I'm going to give of how I first was building our Spanish was including going to, doing the traditional ordering through publishers, but also, there were Spanish language specific presses or distributors. A huge one, which doesn't exist, anymore as of the end of last year. But we would, go and order from them as well, that like only do Spanish language books. And, if we went to like trade shows like Book Expo, I would try and buy up all their stock at the end of the show. There are foreign presses or distributors that now proactively contact us when they're in town. Or, if we hear of something that someone's mentioned, we contact them for the one book that a customer might want. And then that opens up the communication pathway to say, can you send us your like sort of top 5 hits that might be available to that country, like their country, but not necessarily as easily domestically available here. And, there's a lot of relationship building involved in working with the foreign presses that now know to come by the shop and like leave sort of the best of their set. If it's a publisher coming out from Dominican Republic or from Argentina or from Puerto Rico, same country, but sorry, Asian. But they just have to know that you stock Spanish books and that you want to stock more. So I think always making that clear as well, and then really being open to like WhatsApping people instead of always emailing. I've gone around and scouted at book fairs, bringing people with me to help advise. They don't always necessarily have to be book selling or publishing people, but just people who like to read and like know what our communities are reading. Having cash in hand helps in those cases, and then buying up stock after a fair or the next day is a possibility if it's a publisher that's going to go back home to somewhere and it's going to be harder to ship. We have had people like shuttle things back and forth in suitcases. Like recently a staff member went and, did a lot of used book shopping when visiting family in Colombia. And, there are certain books that just aren't available in the US, and we only really get them if someone's going back home and can bring them back for us. Also being really open to consignment, because there are a lot of local people in our neighborhood whose publishers are abroad. So they have copies of their book and some of the other people in their community's book, and they can help stock them with us. And we do that on consignment. And if it sells enough, then we can keep it going. There are also a lot of people in our neighborhood who are also publishing in Spanish. So we just a lot of relationship building there. And a lot of that gets tied to then hosting events with them, but having the events and having, just a reason to be pushing out all the time that Spanish language books are something that we want in the store and that we have in the store and that people can come to in the store, just lets everyone know that more and like builds that cycle. Another thing we've done a little bit is sharing international shipping with fellow bookstores. We're lucky to be in New York City where there are a lot of bookstores and a lot that also would really want books in Spanish from certain publishers. So in a few cases, if you team up so that your DHL shipping goes down, to an amount that kind of makes sense, then, one bookstore or the other will like initiate an order and we might just match it or build on it. But then we can all share the cost of having it shipped over and then be able to sell it at like what seems like a reasonable price. And then sharing with other bookstores in general, I think is helpful. Lots of people are really passionate about getting Spanish language books to the communities we're all in, I think there's a lot of info sharing. I think that happens at least among the booksellers that I, working with. And also remainder companies. There are some remainder companies that also have books, and there's some remainder companies that have like books that are like kids' books in Spanish that I can help, fill out a school fair alongside the books that I'm also ordering traditionally. from publishers.
Okay. I wanted to show you. Sorry. Look what I did. I rigged up. Is that the Random House? The spinner. I just went.
Oh.
Okay. So when you've got a new section or you've got a new thing, I rigged up this regular Penguin Random House English for Classics. And see the practicals that I put in. And I put all this, that's a way to gain space in your store. And it has really, built up a little thing with brand and with personalization in the store that who did this or something like that. It creates a story for your store, whether your main language is English and you sell books in English, but it welcomes it really welcomes the Spanish community. The other thing that I wanted to just shout out is, don't think we have to dumb down our Spanish selection. One of our, and I don't even know if it's Harper or what publisher, is the Wealthy Investing or Wealthy Investor. You have it there. You have.
Oh, that's mine, I think. Yes.
And that book, and that's a book that you would think, oh, that book is not going to sell. It's too. No, it's frankly in our store. It's one of those books that I replace every 5 to 6 days. I'm really crazy about the turnover because I realize, I have Mitchell Kaplan, the owner of our store, it's going, how much is it making for us, babe? How much is it making for us, babe? Because it's very important to make sure that your square footage is really paying off. So I just wanted to show you different little things that we do that really help out. Now, the other thing I just wanted to add really, really fast, because I know we haven't talked about, we've talked about it, but is children's books in Spanish. Just a special note, most of your sections, all of your sections, every single American bookstore in the United States should have a section of children's books in different languages. So either as a standalone or within the foreign language collection of children's titles. Your bookstore, being global in perspective, should already have a small collection. Other things work wonderfully in children's books, and I'm just going to shoot out what I think. So the baby books, the board books, and the bilingual books are doing extremely, extremely well. Many of the middle grade readers within the stores do not do as well because most libraries in the schools have middle grade readers, books, and that's where, they are available and that's where they get them. So what you find that people come into the bookstore is basically for, the younger ones. But we can hook up with libraries and we can hook up with schools specifically now that, there are certain wholesalers that did a lot of books in Spanish to libraries that is no longer around, as well as Lectorum, who was an all Spanish, all library, all school books in Spanish for children, is also out of business. So these are things that we could pick up as independent bookstores with a little bit of knowledge and just a lot of passion.
Which also thinking about your sections in the store, how you're marketing it in your newsletter, how you're merchandising it in the store, having some of the most successful stores that I, get to visit who do curate Spanish kids books, they're looking for sections that are ESL readers. These are new readers, children who are in ESL programs, having it be marketed that way in the store, merchandised, really, really helps. I also brought many, many children's books on those back tables for y'all to take, just to get a little sample of the variety of kids' books that we do publish, some that are bilingual and also images. So feel free to take anything on the back table too. So.
Okay, so.
Yeah, I would also mention that a lot of when we've been doing school fairs, either to dual language schools or even schools that aren't dual language that are language of instruction's English, but we sell still a lot of books in Spanish at those school fairs. And that's then led to building relationships to then be the vendor for those schools for the middle grade readers and stuff that they want to get, which sometimes they can't necessarily get from like a more traditional publisher, and that we might then have to broker that relationship with a publisher abroad to get them. But they really do want to work with, once you build that relationship, they really do want to work with an indie bookstore and give them the business if you find the right person. But the books that we like everybody wants all the time are graphic novels. So we have, and I remember this came up once I remember seeing like on a Facebook group that was like, what genres do you have in Spanish at your store? Like, or what do you want to have? But we want to have all of them. Like, and especially, so we try, we're so far from having that. And some of our sections we have, they're just small sections in English too, and we combine them. And then otherwise we do have, sort of fluctuating sizes of sections. But, one that was like a more recent ad was having like comics and not just, and then putting them with the other comics and having them, but also doubled in the same way we might have like the highly illustrated middle grade and kind of both sections. But then we also have had books that are not like sections that for a moment we had a Crónicas section that is in Spanish, but like that kind of genre exists in Spanish and didn't really exist in the same way in English. People, there's just like little signals that you can give throughout the store to help, like, there's the signage throughout the store that you can be letting people know that there are books in Spanish somewhere they can ask about. But also then someone pointed out it should be in the window. Like there should be like a hint of something, like the book's in the book display. Throw in a few books in Spanish or a sign that says you have libros en español. Or like we have a lot of, in every other newsletter we have Spanglish in the subject line so that people know that this is a bookstore that is open to having Spanish programming and books. And then on our like website homepage, there's like a pre-order section just for books in Spanish. And, we sell a lot more books in English in the store, out of the store, etc. But, all of that increases year after year, I think, because in that cycle of like people knowing that they can come here as a place for books in Spanish and that they can help like provide them in whatever ways they can. Getting flyers out or info out to parts of the neighborhood more specifically where more Spanish is spoken is something that we make an effort to do. But also just getting the word out through schools, it's really big. And because there's like so many, like there's the schools, but then there's the parents, and then there's all the, everyone that is trying to like share info. There's always like that kind of crew within schools. And I don't know where we were.
We're at translation.
Oh.
Yeah, but before that, I wanted to add some. I just want to reiterate certain things, if I can. Once again, for selection, for sourcing, for bringing in books, talk to your customers, as she says. Look at Ingram. Ingram is doing really cool things for books in Spanish. I want to tell you that an opening day inventory, even though most of you have Spanish sections, you can check, is completely available through Ingram, which is kind of cool. Very cool. With their new to-be platform covered, it'll be very interesting to see the kind of informational and bibliographic data in books in Spanish that's going to help you guys and us sell to libraries, which it would be a great business for an independent bookstore to be able to sell to your local libraries books in Spanish that are predominant and that are so important to your section. Don't forget publishers like Harper, who it's not a niche. It's basically just their strongest titles that can tie up to your community that they have. Also look at IPG, look at PRH, look at Simon & Schuster, look at different wholesalers. There's a Spanish Publishers LLC that carries maybe 10 very important publishers from Spain. There's a Shed that is bringing in a lot of stuff. So, there are a lot of books in the United States that are being distributed. I know we have to go out of our way, but sometimes it's really good to start with the no-brainers and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and start it and then develop it from there and learn from there.
Which kind of briefly touches on the translation quality and trust that we wanted to talk about, where many of your kind of the questions that we got were, how do we judge a translation? How do we find these titles that might, maybe they work in English, we want to see how they do in Spanish. When I was a bookseller, I used to love the indie, meet with the indie presses downstairs, because that, to me, for example, some of our current IPS publishers, Lizzie Davis, who is an editor at Transit, she has exceptional Spanish book taste. She is the person that I will email, text, be like, tell me what I need to read. And I completely trust her. And I met her at a Winter Institute. Same for Two Lines Press. I keep a note of what books they are translating from Spanish to English, because it's an author that I maybe want to flag when I do see Planeta picking it up, or another one of our IPS distributed publishers showing them in Spanish. So things like that, talking to these editors, talking to these publishers, talking to other booksellers who read in Spanish. I'm very lucky that I have Javier and Vicky from Wild Detectives, as well as Claudia, who tell me what excites them about different Spanish languages. And that's the kind of information that you really can't find those things out until you meet booksellers at Winter Institute and meet these indie publishers who that's all they want to talk to. So never be afraid I used to love to cold email editors and publishers, being like, I love your work. Can you recommend X, Y, and Z? And they loved it. So making connections that way and building your colleague list through just send a cold email. Or like I said, talk to your rep and let us be a liaison to that publisher or to that author that you might be interested in, and see what event opportunities there are for you.
I wanted to also add that you put that back? That one. Even though that's talking about translation, the quality, etc., the pictures are actually pictures from Books and Books, our store, that I just sneak in the English book with the Spanish book, and it's amazing how people really appreciate that, and they just, oh, okay, they have it in Spanish, and I'm bilingual, and maybe I feel more comfortable reading it, and what happens is it sells, and it sells outside of that Spanish section. You kind of sneak it in. I like to do that. I like to put a lot of books in Spanish within, for example, our cookbooks. And I have authored 2 cookbooks. Our cookbooks in Spanish are in the English section. And people love it, and that works out great.
Well, and I think before we move on that bottom point, booksellers don't have to be experts to curate well. A couple of us were talking earlier. This is kind of like when romance you don't have to be an expert in romance to have a romance section. You don't have to be an expert in Spanish to have a Spanish section. That's really where you lean on us. You lean on our editorial directors. That is literally part of our job, is to help you get what you need for your customers. Whatever it is, just let us know and we can take a look at it. Edward loves slicing and dicing our list to what matches a store, what matches, whether it's a specific event and you need, let's say, books like Wealthy Investor, you need 5 other titles for readers of that. Great. We can pull that together for you. That's what we're here for. Always. That's what we can do anytime you need it.
So is that it for translation?
We did that one. Next.
What is this?
That's where you're at.
Okay, hold on. I wanted to add one more thing about translation, if it's okay. Understanding the Spanish dialects, the differences, the regional variations is super important foundation to developing your Spanish language section. Generally, Latin American Spanish is more common in the United States. We all know this. Cover Mexican Spanish, Central American Spanish, Caribbean Spanish, Spanish from Colombia, and Cuban Spanish, the language spoken by most U.S. families, immigrants. However, Spain is the mother tongue, and the publishing and books world in Spanish revolves around Spain. Mexico is another publishing mecca that has pretty universal Spanish. And Argentina actually has a great reputation for having real, proper, and kind of generic Spanish that everybody can read. Colombia has great writers, great Spanish, great translation, but unfortunately, terrible distribution in the United States. And no matter the origin, the future Hispanic reader is going to be bilingual and is going to be biliterate. Okay, next please. Now we're running on to, sorry. Okay, now we come to the reaching out, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Once you research your section, you have your beginning section, you deepened your section, you fix it. What happens? Well, you don't expect people to know this on their own. You really need to reach out. You need to connect. Reach out. What community organizations exist? Get a list, send emails, send messages. One by one, walk the talk and do the work. Include all organizations, especially neighborhood groups, concentrating on those geographically nearest to your store. You support their programs and missions by selling books in Spanish. Reach out to consulates of Hispanic countries near your area. Important cities with consulates that do a lot of work are Chicago, New York, Miami, Houston, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., New Orleans, Phoenix, Orlando, Seattle, Philadelphia, and Atlanta. The Hispanic countries that you are reaching out through consulates are Mexico, Cuba, El Salvador, Dominican Republic, Spain, Guatemala, Colombia, Honduras, Venezuela, Chile, Peru, Argentina. Puerto Rico does not have a consulate, but the Hispanic Federation is very important. And don't forget the ever-present commercial offices of Spain located in many, many cities. These represent opportunities to connect constantly. Participate in their events and help them with author appearances. If you have room, offer your venue for free. This brings in walk-in traffic from that community. Reach out to expats. They love getting together. There's social clubs through social media, word of mouth, offer them a space, give them a courtesy discount. Reach out to your public library system. The same people that go to the libraries and check out books in Spanish are the same people that are going to walk into your libreria, into your bookstore and do the books that circulate well in libraries or books that sell well in bookstores. Reach out to digital and print newsletters. Contact academia. Are there any colleges, universities? But also start lower, pre-Ks, kinders, little school book fairs. That's a way to go. The other thing is work your way through night schools and technical schools. There are many licenses right now, including the general contractor's license in Florida, that you can actually take in Spanish. Well, probably not now, but anyways, you could take in Spanish, and that is one that, you could do special orders. You could do, it's a nice business because there are books that they need. It's actually an open book exam. So those are the things that you can do. That's what we've done. So just don't do universities, but think globally, think a little more.
Yeah.
Outreach.
Yeah. Sorry, I jumped to some of this thinking I got confused with what spot we were in when I spoke a little earlier about the signage and about the subject lines and stuff. But there's so much to say. And that, and I don't know what level, I know that a lot of you have sections already. So, but are here still. So I'm assuming you want to, kind of get deeper with it and build. And I think one really easy suggestion for at least the programming people, and also just helping with making a section fill out is to have a bilingual story time. That's a good, easy start, I think. Parents and kids, they have different language levels and different primary languages. And even then, different fairy tales and stories. And so a story time is a way to create a space where both languages are valued, and that, where speakers of both languages can be. And a book, there are a lot of bilingual kids books, and some within the same book. But, even if a book doesn't necessarily have to be bilingual for the story to be bilingual, you can, do a story time with a wordless book. And if you have a great storyteller who's running your story time, it can be a bilingual event without even necessarily having all of the books in that story time be bilingual. And then the advertising for story time can be in both languages, ideally on the same page, so that the different members of the family can read it. And if it's a family where, one generation is mostly monolingual Spanish speaker, but then maybe kids in school are mostly reading in English. This way, everybody can see what the event's about, and then you can build in time before, after the stories to like talk to everyone at the event. Just talk to parents, share resources, ask them what more they might want. So, like a big part of our story time has been sharing resources with families about what's available at local libraries, like what events in the city are there, and like not just necessarily reading, but we also have done like workshops for parents. Like one of our longtime story time reader did workshops for parents on how to do story time at home. So then, she ended up establishing a following, like wherever she like moved out of New York at one point, and people were still asking her for Zoom story times. And then sometimes then she would always refer them back to our shop to get the books. And that's just, I think, one easy way to start. And, I think anytime if you're trying to start an event, something, and you want to just get people in the door, we always like to have food. So that's something we did early on too, when we started trying to make our story times a bigger deal. Like we'd have story time family breakfast. And, once that kind of develops more, I think the biggest thing that we learned was just building in time for the outreach, because it's not just creating an outreach plan. It's then, okay, this is what we're going to do. Now we should translate what this is, that this flyer and this description and, everything is understandable in the other language. And then time for editing the translation and then designing a flyer in the way that conveys well in both languages, or doing 2 different flyers and making that decision. And like, there's a whole, a little process to that might feel like a lot the first time around. But then once you have something established, like anything, you have a template, and then you can just use that same template each time, or use that same process each time, or throw it to the same collective member who really wants to be, like is a translator, or isn't a translator, but wants to be, and wants to practice their translation. And, but yeah, a lot of it is, right. Yeah. Okay.
I do want to give people time for Q&A. So,
but we want to do call to action before we do, it just leads right into a Q&A. And the call to action is, once again, connect with other bookstores. Okay. That's just the way to do it. Another call to action is create a section. Okay. That's a given. Add Spanish shelf talkers. That's a given. Display and market Spanish language books by including them in other sections, English sections. Hire Spanish speaking booksellers, or better yet, okay, train your booksellers to sell books in Spanish and English. We, out of our store, we have 20 employees, maybe 3 speak Spanish. Everybody else just sells books in Spanish and English. Offer a staff anti-racism training and ensure that your store is an inclusive environment. Offer conversations and talk of the table events on immigration issues in the United States. You do not, once again, need to speak Spanish to be a great buyer of books in Spanish. The bilingual story times, a call to action, apply for grants. Might be good. Go to your library. Try to sell your library. Sell the books is the call to action, I think. Think of different ways to support books in Spanish and your Spanish-speaking customers. And now, Q&A?
Yeah. She's coming around with a mic, so she will get to you.
Well, for accessibility, we do need it to be into the mic. Sorry.
It's totally fine. No worries at all. Thank you. Hi, everyone. How are you? Thank you so much. One of the things I know that y'all had talked about was obviously Spanish is not a niche thing, which is absolutely correct. But one of the things that I run into a lot is finding LGBTQ specific Spanish language books. And I'm assuming it just needs to be more of a conversation with others. But I also have a demand for Portuguese. That is the other top one. And so I'd love to hear some thoughts from y'all on sourcing other language books, if you do, for that matter, and how you've been able to build those relationships, whether it's with publishers or others. The LGBTQ is very niche. I can probably talk to many of you on the side, but for other languages, especially Portuguese, because that's definitely a predominant language in my community right now, aside from Spanish. Thank you.
Which I'll let them also talk on that for the bookstore part. That power search feature that we talked about earlier in the session, I highly recommend it. It changed everything of how I buy, of just knowing that iPage has this capability to be as detailed as you are willing to be detailed. Because I love niche as well. And you can change BISAC options to LGBTQ as well as languages, which many people don't know. So that's just on the data side.
We have, and I do, Christina, I have some information that I can send you about distributors of books of Portuguese, both adult and children, as well as other languages. For children, you might want to try, I want to tell you, Little Libros has some kind of Portuguese on, something like that, but I will send you the information.
Yeah, we had last year we briefly had for half the year, quarter of the year, a Portuguese story time. So I can pass you the contacts that we reached out to for that too. But also, so the fairs that I was talking about before that I would scout at were all just local, fairs, but Guadalajara Book Fair too, like going there, my mind exploded because everything I'd been looking for was there. And there were a lot of Portuguese publishers there who I actually haven't reached out to those, but have just grabbed all the info to eventually do. But yeah, for the story time started, I can share those contacts after.
Questions?
Okay, I saw this hand first.
Hi, thank you for being here. I don't have as much a question as a couple of admonishments. As you can hear from my accent, I definitely didn't grow up here in the States. And when I first came here, I knew I was going to be here for the long run. So I started specifically looking for books in Spanish so that I couldn't lose my language. I knew that was a real possibility. So I started scouting the libraries, the bookshops, and the only things I found were the classics. And once you've seen 3 titles of Isabel Allende or Garcia Marquez, you don't even keep looking because it's like, okay, this is another place that really hasn't tried. So even though I agree, those are great books, those are books that are well written, sometimes to prove that you tried more than just saying, oh, well, I have to have a Spanish language book, shelf, you may have to go to things like even not knowing the language at all, if the publisher initially published, it's a broad, a well-spread publisher in a different country, like in Argentina, in Spain, you know that they are not translating for the US market. They are translating for the Spanish market, for the Argentinian market. So those are going to be good translations, which gives you a little bit more play on what you can get, and it's still safe.
Remember, the only place that the Spanish book industry is small is here in the United States.
So you mentioned at the beginning allocating shelf space. You also mentioned integrating the books. I was wondering what you found is the best way to serve those customers. Is it putting with the genre, or is it putting it in its own language section?
Both things. Both. I scatter the books all over, okay? The more you put books all over the store, the more somebody will pick up the book. Well, you know that from English.
For the most part, the only ones that we combine are where it's like we only have a few books, like in, myths and legends. So it's with the English myths and legends. And like maybe in our kids section, the kids section is physically separate from the adult section. So there's like in
cooking and art are two of those. Art is another section where if it's in Spanish, we put it in art.
Or if you are limited on merchandising space, say it's just 2 shelves and you want to test it. Another great way that I think helps identify with new readers to Spanish or current ones is to have those 2 shelves, and within those 2 shelves, merchandise them by genre. So like we sell Planetas Rebecca Yarros. Like if you create a little fantasy genre of Spanish, or the people who are looking for business books in Spanish. And even if it's just 2 shelves, it's very easy to be picked up and identified of this is what I want to read, versus some new customers get instantly overwhelmed if they're first trying out Spanish books.
Go ahead.
Hi. I was wondering, how are you training your staff that don't already speak Spanish? Like on interacting with customers that maybe only speak Spanish or looking for those books that your booksellers don't necessarily haven't read and maybe aren't familiar with.
Do you mean if they don't speak the language? If they come in and it's an American, it's somebody that doesn't speak Spanish and somebody that only speaks Spanish comes in? Is that exact?
Right. Yeah. We have that combination. We have pretty much all English speaking staff, maybe 2 that might speak Spanish. And then, but there's also a large population.
I tell them to use an app.
Spanish.
I mean, that's how we're doing it. Okay. We're doing it with an app. Unless they run across the store and like, how can you get, or somebody else. We like I said, our majority of our booksellers do not speak Spanish. So yeah, they use an app a lot.
Yeah, I'd say similar. We'll find someone else on staff who speaks Spanish, or like a customer who might speak Spanish. There is usually a willing customer who might do it, or we use an app. Or if it's a really complicated question that maybe isn't even about books, like I might run next door.
You'd be surprised how many customers volunteer to translate for you.
But quite often too, someone has like a specific book they're looking for. Either they're browsing, and then when it's time to, do the transaction, there's we maybe have sometimes I've had some like guide sheets on like kind of phrases that are the most basic for a transaction. But sometimes they go missing.
And to look up in your system, authors is what works. I mean, that's what we tell them. Just get the author, and then you look it up in your system, and then it'll give you a Spanish title.
Yeah, like often if it's a book question, someone is coming in with like a specific book they're looking for if they're not just simply browsing. And then it might take a little bit more time, but we get the job done.
Do we have time for one more?
Yeah.
So I work at a store where we have a number of booksellers who are interested in expanding our fairly small Spanish section, and an owner who is, let's say, very data-driven and is very concerned about low sales. We live in an area that's mostly white, mostly English-speaking by a pretty significant majority. And so I was curious if you had any advice for ways to pitch Spanish sections and expand Spanish sections to management who is more concerned about shelf space and sales, and how you talk about the benefits of doing so outside of just the social benefit of having this section for people in your community.
I think a real practical way was something that I was speaking about, books in Spanish with the section levels, I said, you don't have to know the titles or the type, but you do have to know how much shelf space it takes, how much money is going to take. For example, the first one that I talked about was 25 titles with 50 books with, after discount and everything, $500 allocation. That's how you pitch it to your management. Hey, with $500 investment, look what we can bring in. This is what we can bring in, and we'll see how it turns over. And that's how you can gauge the profitability of the section. Your section has to be profitable or has to be self-serving. I know we're all philanthropic, but we gotta make a living at bookselling.
I feel like I have all these questions to ask you before about like what is the community and what do you do events already before answering. But I'm happy to go into it after the session. And I think there's some like kind of event things you can do, or there's some like I feel like I would need to know more about what the the
Yeah.
reasons that the specific booksellers want to expand the section. Like, I think so much of it comes down to like what communities, are presently there that, and like that you want to be expanding for. And like, really, I don't know. I do feel like there's a lot of tailoring that.
Any other questions that we can get to? Or not? One more?
Okay.
Sorry, I feel like a know-all today, but I do have another way to pitch it, especially in he seems to be in a mostly white place community. One way in which I've been pitching my own Spanish section is we have a Spanish conversation group that is specially geared to mostly Americans that are learning Spanish at all levels. And then you figure out which books you can have that will help them learn. And also then you can spreading other books for the Latino community.
Also, if Dua Lipa can teach herself Spanish in a year, I think y'all can sell some books in Spanish. So use cultural moments when they happen.
Well, and I think it's also, there's a way, if you're bringing in a Latina, Latinx author and bringing their books in English, bring 5 in Spanish, right? Like, just because there's a really good chance that your Spanish speakers are coming to see that author anyway. And that's a sort of less sort of top heavy way to try to bring in maybe just a few copies and see how it goes. And then we're not going to talk about terms, but also like our event co-op doesn't say it's only for English written books. So you can claim event co-op to sell books in other languages that we publish. So you can, sort of apply it that way. That might be kind of a less intense way to start.
And a really cool thing that happens when you have books in Spanish in your store is that you bring 2 or 3 generations. You bring your familia comes in, some pick up a book in English, but sometimes they're reading. I mean, I have an abuela with a granddaughter that they're reading the same book. She's reading it. The abuela's reading it in Spanish. She's reading it in English, and they have a little book club conversation about it and have lunch at the bookstore. Thank you, guys. I mean, this was great. I wasn't we weren't expecting this kind of thing. I've been going through Pittsburgh and asking, do you have books in Spanish? Or do you have books in Spanish? Oh my God, we're not going to get it. And, it's wonderful that we've got so many people that are so interested.
Please take the books
applaud
too.
you guys.
Yeah, please take all the books.
Please take all the books.
All the books.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to share any contacts that I've made with publishers and other places. And if we're close by and can share a shipment, happy to do so.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA site at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!